when I meet people and they say, what do you do? The easy thing is I'm an artist, or I run a nonprofit, right? Like that's, then I'm a respectable, productive member of society, and people will say nice things about me, right?
Yeah.
But if I lead with I'm a dominatrix, then there's like a whole other perception that comes with that.
Hello, creative humans. Welcome back to the F Lines podcast, the show where we talk about creativity, minimalism, and how to be wildly functional in a distracted world. I'm Andrew Foltz, and in this episode, we're talking to Soma Snakeoil. Soma is an artist, activist, playwright, dominatrix, and all-around fascinating human being. We get into her creative projects, how she balances exploration with focus, why honesty is so important to her, what it's like to build a long-term relationship with a mentor, and a lot more. I'm going to stop talking so we can get straight into it, and I hope you guys enjoy this episode with Soma Snakeoil.
So I'm Soma Snakeoil, and I'm an artist and an activist, and I'm on sabbatical right now as a meditation teacher. People probably know me most as being a dominatrix, and I also used to make adult film.
Yeah, and the Sidewalk project too, punk rock and paintbrushes. You have so many things going on, and the thing I'm most impressed about you is, as a creative person, like, you've kept it all together, you know, like you get stuff done. So I'm really interested to know, how do you stay focused as a creative person? How do you get stuff done instead of having a million projects and kind of half finishing everything?
I think I half finished everything.
Yeah, I guess we do.
No, I mean, I think what's really cool about working as a project-based person, or kind of as a process artist, is that you don't necessarily have to complete everything, you know, in a certain way. You can kind of keep things ongoing and come back and touch things when it feels right.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's periods, as I said, I'm taking a little bit of time away from teaching meditation right now, and I'm really very focused on the Sidewalk project.
Yeah.
And I'm really devoting a ton of energy right now on a daily basis to the Sidewalk project. Yeah. And I'll do that sometimes, where I'll just immerse myself.
It's kind of like a reformatting of your creative hard drive, you know, like you have so many projects, and it's really nice to go really deep on one thing at a time.
Yeah, I think it's really important to do that, right? Because then you can do something really well.
Yeah.
And like I said, immerse, and then you can kind of like throw all of your energy into it, and then, you know, put it down for a little bit, and not necessarily give up on it, or stop doing it altogether.
How do you know when it's time to set something down and move on to something else?
You know, I think it depends, really. You know, for now, I'm actually not painting right now either.
Yeah.
And it's because I don't know what I want to say, and I'm not going to just create a bunch of art that doesn't need to be made. And I know that people have a lot of different opinions about that, and some people say you need to paint every day, or you need to draw every day. I'm not that kind of artist personally. I don't need things to look a certain way, you know, like I'm not a technical artist, and you know, that's not something I aspire to be.
Yeah,
you know,
you're a very emotional, fiery person. Like, I love your art. It's just so raw and so real, and that can kind of get lost in the technical part where you're focusing so much on that aspect of it. I'm kind of interested, since you're in this time in your life right now where you have a bunch of space. I know you said before that you had this like God-sized hole in your life, which I thought was a really interesting phrase. How do you feel in relation to space now? Like, have you kind of filled that space in your life, or have you just become more comfortable with having space in your life?
Yeah, I think it would be the latter. I don't need to fill holes. Holes can just,
they're just like sinkholes. Yeah, they never fill.
Yeah, I think I would actually lean into having more space.
Yeah.
If possible, and creating more space.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you create space, because then creativity can come into it. And sometimes if you don't have any space, you can't have any creativity because there's no space for it to come into. I know at one point you were stripping at a club called the G Spot, which is like the most cliche name for a club.
Yeah. There isn't even a G spot, you know?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
Which
But
I
yeah.
guess, yeah, I mean, which is kind of a great metaphor for it. I mean, what I'm really interested in is that creative people all have this moment where they get past some huge fear that they have. They do something that they're really scared of, and then it opens them up. So how, I mean, was that one of the moments where it changed for you in terms of confidence or vulnerability or any of those things, or was it a different moment?
That was definitely one of the moments for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. I definitely learned how to walk, like,
Yeah, I
I
haven't thought
mean,
about that.
dancers can walk in their bodies, right?
Yeah.
And that was a big part of like owning my own skin,
Yeah. Does that kind of
and
go into everyday life? Like, I've never really thought about how I walk, I guess, but that seems like it's kind of really integral to who you are expressing yourself just out there in the world every day.
yeah, that's a big deal. And I think there's even an aspect of safety to that too.
Yeah.
If you can walk with a high level of confidence, with your face up in the air and your shoulders back, and a little bit of a saunter,
Yeah.
that says something to the rest of the world.
That's
In,
interesting
in,
because I
in
think
some
a lot of,
ways,
yeah.
in some ways, that's also setting a boundary.
Mm. Yeah, I've heard you talk a lot about boundaries. I really think that's interesting because my initial reaction would be like, oh, you're attracting, whatever attention. I think that's the stereotype. If you walk a certain way, you're attracting attention to yourself. But you're saying the complete opposite, which I find very interesting, is that the confidence actually creates a boundary between you and teaches other people how you want them to interact with you.
That's absolutely right. And I think that we actually know this from research, that predators actually prey on people who walk with their shoulders hunched and down,
Yeah.
and who look like prey.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, walking with, and this isn't in any way to, I mean, it's never anyone's fault, right?
Yeah.
When some kind of violence is perpetrated, it's not because of the way you walk or what you're wearing or any of those things. We can't blame someone, right,
Right.
because of something that has happened to them. However, there is something about owning your space and owning when you walk into a room. I even say to my kid, you deserve to be in any room that you're standing in.
Yeah.
Put your shoulders back.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, I know you're someone who's talked a lot about self-care, self-love. Why do you think it is that sometimes, maybe even a lot of times, it's harder to love or care for ourselves than it is to care for other people?
In some ways, I think that we're taught that culturally in the United States. We're taught a little bit that that it's not humble, or we're taught that it's cute or funny to be self-deprecating.
Yeah.
It's like it's an undesirable thing to love ourselves. And I think it's actually culturally changing a little bit, and I think the younger generations are challenging that a little bit.
Yeah, you've said you're really inspired by like younger women who are stepping into themselves earlier, which is really cool because they have access. Everyone has access to more information than they ever did before. So we have more opportunities to change as well. Something I know is really important to you is your name. You actually chose your name, Soma. I'm wondering how it changed you after you took on a new name. Like, was it right away that you changed, or was it something you kind of had to grow into?
I think both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think both. And I think that's sort of like any change, right? There's like the initial flash
It's
of
exciting.
some kind of change, right? I mean, whether it's a name change or a riot.
Yeah.
There's what's happening in that moment, and then there's what happens slowly over time and
The
what
ripplings.
unfolds. Yeah, the ripple effects.
Yeah.
Whether that's personal or societal. So yeah, I remember actually the moment I took it in, and the first time it was used publicly was in a club. I was dancing.
Yeah.
And the first time I heard it announced and what that felt like.
What was the song that was playing?
I don't remember that.
Your name was playing. That was the song that was playing.
My name was playing. I like that.
Yeah.
No, but I do remember, I really remember the circumstances, and I made some money that night. I can tell you that.
Is it more than usual?
I made more money than usual that night.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that was, you know?
Yeah. Not important. Yeah.
Yeah, not important, or maybe there's something to it. Stepping into something. Although in some ways
the money wasn't important.
No, the money wasn't important, but it's sort of like what are the conditions that led to sort of a higher level of confidence in whatever. You know?
At one point, did that become a point of no return for you? Because I think you said that you were like stripping under both names for a while, and then at some point you just went all in on Soma, and that became your identity.
I didn't go under both names, but
Okay.
what I did was, for a period of time, I was definitely living under two identities, because
Gotcha.
there was like, you know, which many people do, where they have like their vanilla life, and then they have their more private, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It could be BDSM, it could be sex work, it could be who knows, whatever it is, a different life.
A lot of creative people have that problem.
Yeah, right. There's the things that are not accepted by society.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it was I was a BDSM sex worker, and then I also I had a kid who I would take to school, and people would say, "What do you do?" And I'd have to come up with all of these different things.
Yeah, it's hard to go into those parts of society where it's just kind of like everyday, like banal everyday life, and no one's expecting that, you know, in that environment, and it can make things feel even more controversial. I know that you've talked about speaking the truth aggressively. So I know it kind of changed, you know, after your daughter grew up a bit and it felt like she was kind of her own person and you felt like stepping into it more. Is that kind of the moment where it changed for you and you went kind of all in on honesty?
I would say all in on honesty, probably has had a lot to do with my Buddhist practice. You know, and for me, my Buddhist practice is intrinsically linked with activism and with feminism. And the more that I've opened up spiritually, the more my voice has evolved.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's all linked together.
Is it kind of like the positivity?
And my sobriety as well. So, you know, sort of like with all of those things growing, I've grown as a person and kind of found my voice and come more alive and decided I'm not going to hide anything anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know, it doesn't matter what the consequences are. I'm not going to hide because it's not worth it. Life is too short.
Yeah, it really is. Are there any moments where, I mean, how do you decide when you're going to go all in? Are there any moments where you're like, it's not worth it, or I don't want to be honest, or is it just honesty is now the default all the time?
You know, I'm trying to think of, are there any moments where I try to pass or tone it down or whatever? And there's moments where it's really tempting because there's an easier way, and I can just say things like, you know, when I'm meeting someone, what do you do? Like that's the moment, right? And you know, like we all have those moments when whatever it is, you know, because identity and things that we do it's challenging. And this is a really big part of a conversation right now too, because there are parts of myself that I can hide, right?
Yeah.
And you know, like people of color cannot hide parts of themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So that I do have a certain level of privilege in that I can hide that I'm a sex worker. I can hide that I'm into BDSM. I can hide that I'm queer, right? But I feel like I'm not going to do that. Like people, I'm an artist, or I run a nonprofit, right? Like then I'm a respectable, productive member of society, and people will say nice things about me, right?
Yeah.
But if I lead with I'm a dominatrix, then there's like a whole other perception that comes with that, right?
I love that you also, like, even beyond that, you will start conversations by saying, I beat people up, which I think is a great tagline. But I do see like how that would how that could take a conversation from, like level 1 to level 10 very quickly. And you have this quote, you talk about, you say, I will lead with the hard thing. I think that that's a really great piece of life advice for creative people, to not hide themselves. How do you feel that it changes conversations when you lead with, like, the knob turned up to 11 versus starting out at a 3?
Well, it certainly makes it interesting.
Yeah.
There's that, right? It's sort of like you skip the how's the weather. But I think it's also a matter of authenticity, right? And I have the intention to lead an authentic and meaningful life.
Yeah.
So I think that means we have to crank it to 11.
I think, when I get, the older I get, and I'm not that old yet, but I have less and less patience for beating around the bush. Like, the more you're honest with yourself and who you are and the things that you believe, the less you want to spend time talking about the weather and going in these really long routes to get to what it is that you really want to talk about. So I think that's really cool.
Sorry to interrupt you, but then I think we end up getting to a place where we can be more intimate and more connected with people too, because there's a lot that people end up not saying out of fear themselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the cool thing about BDSM is that there is some of that going to extremes very quickly. I think that that's something that can create a lot of intimacy. And I haven't really thought about that. But now that I see that quote, I'm going to try this a lot more, just like, how can I start out at 11 and see what happens? And I think it could be a really good way to attract, interesting people into your life. Something I'm really interested to ask you about is having a mentor. I know that you kind of self-coached yourself starting out by reading books and things like that, but how is it different to actually have a real mentor?
I mean, I can't show enough gratitude to Domina Angelina. I mean, for me, she's, mentor almost isn't a big enough word.
Yeah.
There's so many facets to our connection and our relationship. I almost think of it as, this is a very long-term relationship. And if you're going to have a mentor, you should watch this person for a little bit and, determine, are you willing to go through life with this person?
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you will go through life with this person, but there is that potential. It can be a very deep relationship.
I think that's a good question to ask, because I haven't thought about mentors in that way. And I think a lot of people look at mentors as someone who could, help them earn a certain amount of money or achieve a certain result. But I guess if you're looking to find a mentor, asking yourself whether you want to have a long-term relationship with this person is really important. I haven't thought about that before.
Yeah, and to me, it's this is also someone that is your elder, and that you have a great deal of respect for, and that they will let you shine.
Yeah.
And that they will help support you in your development. And that's going to continue to change and evolve over time, so that the relationship will continue to change and evolve over time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to look a certain way all the time, but to me, it's like, you cannot learn something as intricate and nuanced as BDSM or spirituality or, you know, some of these very deep things without someone who's gone through it.
Yeah.
Someone who's experienced it.
Yeah.
Someone who can understand, you know, the mess, not just the beauty, the mess.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Someone who will, you know, sit with you and cry with you if necessary, or laugh with you, and you know, we'll teach you about butt plugs.
There's always that. Yeah. What did she see in you, you know, as a mentor that made her want to start a relationship with you?
I actually know, because she's shared with me, but she saw my fire. She actually, her nickname for me is Umi, which means fire. And you know, I trained traditionally with her, which means that I was submissive to her, and I still write to her in submissive protocol. And this bracelet is a token of, you know, my relationship with her. You know, it signifies, you know, our connection. But you know, in the beginning, I was very resistant to kneeling, and definitely not wanting to kneel in front of other people. And I think that she liked that I wasn't just going to do anything that was told without questioning.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know you've talked about the importance of being a submissive person to understanding how to be a dominant person. And I think that's a good metaphor to extend out to creativity or learning in general. Sometimes we're not willing to be the submissive person in order to learn how to be the dominant person in life. So I think that's really cool. I want to talk about your painting, because your painting is so cool. One of my favorite things about your painting is that you go dumpster diving for materials. And I'm wondering, like, how does finding your own materials change the feeling or the end process versus just buying materials to paint on or to paint with?
Well, I have to get dirty.
Yeah.
I have to fight for it a little bit. It's actually a process of hunting and gathering, you know. Like I don't know where I'm going to find it. You know, I can't just go to, you know, whatever it's called, Flick or Blick or whatever, you know. Like it could be anywhere. It could be, you know, on the side of the street. It could be, you know, a dumpster anywhere in the city. And that's sort of like, where is it going to be? Is part of the inspiration. And it's also part of like, when I see something, it starts my creative process, because whatever this thing is, like this thing is a piece of art that I found, and it's part of a billboard, and it was rolled up on the side of the road, and I saw it after a yoga class, and I was like, oh, I need this thing, right? Like this is, and I became really inspired by it. And then it was like the worst thing in the world to try and get into my car and get the car closed, and then like getting it into the house, and I don't know how I'm ever going to get it out again. But like that predicament is like part of the really interesting problem solving creative process. It's so much more interesting than buying a piece of canvas for me.
Yeah. I know what you mean. When I was in Maine one time, I was out, I had hiked, I don't know, like an hour out, and then I found this old crate. I don't know, I think it was like a lobster crate or something. And I liked it so much that I dragged it like 2 hours back across all these boulders. And I don't even know why I did it, because it wasn't even that special. But you know, the work that you put into things sometimes makes them special, which is really cool.
It sounds pretty great.
Yeah, it's still in the garage. It's housing weird things like soccer balls and all other kinds of stuff, art supplies, you know. I know that you said that you are sober now, but I'm really interested how because a lot of people use drugs for inspiration, creative people especially. So I'm wondering where you're getting your inspiration to go out on the edge now, you know, just Soma, not any other external stuff.
You know, there's so many edges. It's like, sort of a little bit of an endless question, but you know, I mean, I find my edges with the pigeons that have taken roost on my balcony. I find my edges emotionally, you know, like with history and memories and the things that I write. And, you know, I have sort of like the edges that come with sort of being in COVID, and how am I a sexual being in COVID as a polyamorous person? And, you know, like there's endless
it's so
edges.
Hard to,
you know, like I feel like there's just like never a need to take another drug, because my mind is so vibrant, and there's always a new question. There's always a new edge. And then
I like that. There's always a new question.
You know what
that's
I mean?
really good.
Like, and then adding another person into that, that's, you know, there's just
multiplying.
Yeah. I mean, if you're curious, you're always going to find an edge.
Yeah. So you've talked about this idea of pushing, which is really cool. On the She's a Punk podcast, which was an awesome episode, by the way, you say to me, it's not so much about the change as it is about pushing back against the forces of oppression. So whether or not it happens, it's about the push. So when are you okay with things not turning out as you wanted them to turn out? And how do you set the level for yourself, knowing that you can't accomplish everything that you want to accomplish or see come to change?
I just simply can't accomplish everything I want to accomplish.
Yeah.
It's just simply absolutely impossible.
Was there a time when you like realized that? Because I know a lot of people, myself included, I mean, I was like, at a certain point, I was feeling like I could accomplish everything. And then you realize, oh, I can't accomplish maybe 1% of what I think, or maybe 1,000%. And then you kind of realize, oh, this is what's realistic. Did you have a moment like that?
I'm not sure.
Just gradual.
I don't know if I've had a moment like that, or if I've just generally lived like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I can't give you an answer to that, but I do know that I really can't be attached to outcomes. Maybe a little bit of it has been part of my learning with Home Street Home.
Yeah.
You know, writing a musical that you've been working on. I'm kind of, it's complicated, but you know, working on that project for 10 years.
Yeah.
And always expecting it to get to this place where it was going to open on Broadway.
Yeah.
And it was just going to happen, and it was going to happen any minute. And that happened, you know, it was like always on the edge of this thing for 10 years.
Just maddening.
The script is like, it's the last script. It's the last version of the script for 10 years. You know, I don't even know how many iterations of that script I wrote.
Yeah.
You know, at some point, you know, and talk about like impermanence, you know, theater is all about impermanence, and it's also the most collaborative art form, right? Yeah. So you kind of have to like really learn to let go of the process.
Yeah, there's so little you can control with human beings.
Totally out of control.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big part of my learning, that it's not about outcomes. You just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And you know, as an activist, you definitely have to just, it's not about outcomes. You just keep moving, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that topic, one thing that I learned from you is that there's this distinction between homeless and houseless. And I think a lot of people are really confused about seeing people on the street and assuming that they have no choices, that they are here because they're in a passive state of mind, their life has fallen apart. But I'm wondering, from your experience, what are some of the choices that people have made where they could say, okay, I could live, you know, in the system, or I could live on the street? What are some of the freedoms that they may have that people may not have thought of? Or just some of the facts in general that people may not have thought of?
Well, that's a super complicated question.
Yeah.
Because there are many different circumstances that lead to people being on the street and then also continuing to live on the street. And the system that we have in the United States is I mean, we're living in capitalism,
Yeah.
and capitalism is set up for some people to have much and some people to have very little to
Yeah.
nothing. It eats people alive.
Yeah.
And there's this sort of very thin line between having a home and not having a home.
Yeah.
Or a house. And I think sort of the issue is that it's stigmatized
Yeah.
to not have a house. And so there's a lot of belief systems that exist that once you are houseless, that you're somehow less than, and that your rights.
You can't have a home. I mean, that's just not patently not true, right? That you, just because you don't have a house, you don't have a home.
That's right.
Yeah.
You don't have a home. But a tent can be a home, or
people can be a home.
People can be a home, or a car, or a community, or, you know, your own body.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of,
Ooh,
it's,
yeah.
There's a lot of questions to ask around that. But, you know, I think the big thing is that, you know, people's rights are taken away, and people are harmed in a very, very serious way, just because they don't have shelter.
Yeah.
And, you know, the police hurt people, and society crushes the houseless community in so many different ways. And this is like a big intersectional question. You know, it's people of color, it's the queer community, it's sex workers, it's
a microcosm of everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mentally ill people, it's just anyone. It's out on the street. People are really discriminated against and ignored. You know, like when you're walking down the street and you want to ignore the person who's asking for money because you don't want to look at it. Not you.
Yeah. Although I have, you know, as everyone has. And I think part of the problem is that we're overrun with problems and people don't know what to do about it. And it's kind of like what we've talked about, is that you have to choose which problems you want to address, and you have to, you simply can't solve every problem in the world. So I really admire that you have found a problem that you've gone deep on, and obviously you have a wide array of other things that you do too. But I know we're running out of time here, so one more question for you. Right now we have POTUS, who who is a bit of a joke, but I'd like to imagine a world in which we have GOTUS, Goddess of the United States. So if we had Soma as Goddess of the United States, what would you change to make things a little bit different?
It's funny that you say that, because actually one of my friends ran for president the year that Donald Trump ran, and Hillary. And she did a serious campaign, Tara, Indiana. Yeah, and I'm actually in a group with her, Dom's Against Donald. What would I change? I mean, that's such a big question, isn't it?
What one thing would you change if you could just change one thing?
Well, I would definitely defund the police.
Yeah.
And I'd abolish the police. I'd start there. You know, I mean, I like to think of dismantling capitalism, and I don't necessarily know exactly what that looks like, but I'd like to see a people's America where it's not, where all of the wealth isn't in the hands of just a few people that crushes down the rest of society, and there's all of these different systems of marginalization.
Yeah.
You know, I would like to see equity and dignity and justice.
Yeah, just to start.
You know?
Yeah.
Not just for a few. For few is not actually equity.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it feels like we really have a lack.
Speaking in those terms, or, you know, let's start there. That's a basic.
I love it. Let's just end there. You know, I'm just gonna savor this world of President or Goddess Soma. You know, just like, let's just take down capitalism and everything will be good and we will have dignity and respect and equality. And yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it. But if people want to get in touch with you and find more about the Sidewalk Project or any of your other amazing creative projects, where can people find you online?
Probably Instagram is the best place because that's where I actually write back.
Which you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like Instagram. And that's Soma Snakeoil on Instagram. And then the Sidewalk Project, which is the _sidewalk _project also on Instagram. Thank you for today.
Yeah, this is really fun. Thanks so much for
Yeah.
having this conversation with me. And yeah, I look forward to learning from you. There's all kinds of really cool stuff on Instagram. So if you guys are listening to this podcast, definitely follow Soma because she has a ton of thoughts on everything, super deep thoughts. So thank you, Soma. And I'll talk to you sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for what you're doing. And I really love your Instagram and your art so much too. Big fan of what you do.
All right. I'll catch you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.